We didn't expect this experiment to turn awkward, but about 10 minutes in, the room went quiet, in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. These were longtime Windows users, people who had used Windows for years, some for decades. People who could fix driver issues blindfolded and knew exactly where every setting was hidden. And we told them something very simple. For the next 30 days, Windows is gone. No dual boot. No virtual machines. No safety net. You're using Linux as your main operating system for everything you normally do. Work, gaming, browsing, editing, meetings, all of it. At first, they laughed. Some thought it was a joke. Others assumed Linux had finally become a Windows clone and this would be easy. That assumption did not survive the first boot. The reactions started immediately. The first user stared at the desktop and asked where the start menu was. Another tried to right-click and got a different context menu than expected. Someone else asked why the taskbar looked wrong, and another person complained that the fonts felt off in a way they couldn't explain. It wasn't anger yet, more like confusion mixed with disbelief. They expected Linux to fight them technically, but what they didn't expect was how much muscle memory Windows had carved into their brains. Even moving the mouse felt strange to some of them, not because Linux was harder, but because it was different in tiny ways that added up fast. We installed a popular Linux distribution that people often describe as Windows-friendly. We didn't customize it beyond the defaults. No heavy theming, no advanced tweaks. We wanted to see what would happen when Windows users encountered Linux, as it actually ships to normal people. The first day was rough. One user tried to install Chrome by downloading an exe file and double-clicking it. When that didn't work, they assumed something was broken. Another went hunting for the control panel. Someone else opened the software store and asked why everything looked like mobile apps. A few were genuinely surprised that software installation didn't involve going to random websites and clicking download buttons. That surprise wasn't always positive. The most uncomfortable moment came when we asked them to do normal tasks without guidance. Open a document, connect a Bluetooth device, install a printer, unzip a file, install a piece of software they use every day. On Windows, these tasks are often messy, but familiar. On Linux, some things were smoother, others were alien. One user tried to install a printer and immediately asked why it worked without downloading anything. They didn't trust it. They kept waiting for an error that never came. Another user struggled with a Bluetooth headset that connected but didn't show the expected options. They said it felt like the system was hiding information from them. By the end of the first week, frustration was visible. But something interesting happened too. The complaints shifted. Instead of saying this is broken, they started saying this doesn't work the way I expect. That difference matters. Linux wasn't failing. It was refusing to behave like Windows. And for people who had internalized Windows as the default way computers should behave, that felt threatening. One participant admitted they felt less in control, not because Linux was limiting them, but because it wasn't holding their hand in the same way. Another said the opposite, that Linux felt more honest, like it told you what it was doing instead of pretending everything was simple. Then came software. This is where things got truly uncomfortable. Some Windows-only applications were simply gone. No official Linux versions. No easy replacements. Some users tried compatibility layers and got mixed results. A few programs worked surprisingly well. Others crashed, glitched, or refused to run at all. This sparked the first real debates in the room. Was this Linux's fault, or the software vendors? Windows users are used to blaming Windows for everything, but here, the blame had nowhere obvious to land. Linux wasn't blocking these apps. They were never built for it in the first place. Gaming was another reality check. A few participants assumed gaming on Linux was still impossible, stuck in the past. Others expected it to be flawless. The truth landed somewhere in between. Some games ran better than expected. Others required tweaking. Anti-cheat systems caused problems that no amount of Linux knowledge could fix. One gamer stared at an error message and said something that stuck with us. "It's not that this is harder. It's that I don't get to be lazy anymore." That sentence summed up the entire experiment more than anything else. Around week 2, something unexpected happened. A few users stopped complaining. Not because everything was perfect, but because they had adapted. They learned keyboard shortcuts that felt faster than Windows. They discovered that updates didn't interrupt their work. They noticed the system stayed fast after days of uptime. One person said their laptop battery lasted longer, and they weren't sure why. Another realized their system hadn't asked for a restart, even once. These weren't dramatic revelations, but they were quiet wins that slowly changed attitudes, but not everyone adapted. One participant grew more annoyed over time. They missed Microsoft Office exactly as it was. They missed OneDrive integration that worked without thinking. They missed knowing that if something went wrong, Google would give them a Windows-specific fix instantly. On Linux, solutions existed, but they required reading, understanding, and sometimes using the terminal. The terminal was a psychological barrier more than a technical one. The moment people saw black screens with white text, some shut down emotionally. Others leaned in and felt empowered. The divide was sharp. The terminal became a symbol of the experiment. Windows users are told for years that the command line is outdated and unnecessary. Linux doesn't hide it, even if you rarely need it. For some users, typing commands felt like stepping backward in time. For others, it felt like gaining X-ray vision into the system. One participant said they finally understood what their computer was doing, instead of just clicking icons and hoping for the best. Another said they felt like they were doing the operating system's job for it. By week 3, we asked a dangerous question. If you had to choose today, no pressure, no loyalty, no sunk cost, which system would you use tomorrow? The answers were uncomfortable, in a different way. Some said Windows immediately, without hesitation. Linux felt like work to them, even when it worked well. Others hesitated, paused, and admitted they weren't sure anymore. A few surprised everyone by saying Linux, but with conditions. They wanted better app support, better hardware, compatibility guarantees, and clearer onboarding for new users. The most telling responses weren't about features at all. They were about trust. Windows users are used to a company deciding how their system changes. Updates arrive, whether you like them or not. Features appear and disappear. Ads sneak into places they didn't used to exist. On Linux, nothing changed unless the user allowed it. For some, that felt freeing. For others, it felt like abandonment. One participant said, "Windows feels like a landlord. Linux feels like owning a house. But owning a house means fixing your own plumbing." Then came the final week. By now, habits had formed. People stopped trying to make Linux behave like Windows and started using it on its own terms. File managers were used properly. Software repositories felt normal. The desktop stopped feeling strange. And that's when the most uncomfortable realization hit. Linux wasn't worse. It wasn't better either. It was simply honest about what it demanded from the user. Windows had spent years smoothing over complexity, sometimes at the cost of transparency. Linux exposed that complexity and asked the user to meet it halfway. At the end of the experiment, we sat everyone down and asked them to describe Linux in one sentence. The answers were raw. Powerful but indifferent. Free but demanding. Stable but unforgiving. Faster than I expected. Less annoying than Windows updates. More work than I want to do. No one called it obsolete. No one called it broken. And that might be the most telling result of all. The real discomfort wasn't technical. It was philosophical. Linux challenged the idea that an operating system should protect users from themselves. It challenged the assumption that convenience should always come first. It forced Windows users to confront how much of their workflow was built on habits rather than needs. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Even those who said they would go back to Windows admitted they would notice things differently now. Forced updates would feel more invasive. System slowdowns would feel less acceptable. Hidden processes would raise more questions. In the end, we didn't convert everyone to Linux. That was never the goal. What we did was remove the illusion that there is only one way computers are supposed to work. For some, Linux felt like freedom. For others, it felt like responsibility they didn't ask for. And that tension is exactly why this experiment mattered. Because the most uncomfortable result wasn't that Linux failed Windows users, but that it exposed how dependent Windows users are on decisions they never get to make.